1 week after my miscarriage, my mother-in-law walked into my kitchen, carrying a leather folder, and asked if I'd made an appointment with my OB yet. I was still in my robe. I hadn't showered in 2 days. An appointment for what, Margaret? To try again. She set the folder on the counter like she was closing a business deal. The sooner, the better. You're not getting younger. I stared at her. 6 days ago, I'd been lying on an ultrasound table in Hartford Memorial, listening to a technician go quiet in a way that told me everything before the doctor said a word. My husband, Daniel, had held my hand in the parking lot while I cried into his shoulder, and now his mother was standing in my kitchen, talking about trying again, like I'd lost a set of car keys. I need time, I said. Time is exactly what none of us has. She opened the folder anyway. Papers, columns, a name. I recognized Whitfield and Cole, attorneys at law. Your father-in-law and I are updating the family trust. We simply need clarity on the timeline. Clarity on what timeline? Margaret's mouth pressed into a thin line. The same look she gave waiters who got her order wrong. Whether there will be a grandchild to leave the house to, Rachel, or whether we need to make other arrangements. I felt something cold settle behind my ribs. You're rewriting the will. Because I lost a baby a week ago. Don't be dramatic. This is simply prudent planning. She slid 1 page toward me, tapping a line near the bottom. Daniel's cousin Vanessa has 2 children already. Healthy ones. Robert thinks it's only sensible to... Robert thinks... I picked up the page. My hands weren't quite steady. Does Daniel know you're doing this? Daniel, Margaret said, understands that this family doesn't run on sentiment. I set the page down, very carefully. The way you set something down, when what you actually want is to throw it. Get out of my house. She blinked, genuinely startled, like it hadn't occurred to her a daughter-in-law was allowed to say that. Rachel. Out. Now. She left without another word, heels clicking across my hardwood like punctuation. I stood there a long time after the door shut, staring at the folder she'd forgotten, or left on purpose, on my counter. That night, after Daniel fell asleep, I finally opened it. And on the second page, under a paragraph I had to read 3 times to understand, I found a date. Not last week. Not the week I lost my baby. 6 weeks before the miscarriage, the exact week. I had first told Margaret I was pregnant. Whitfield and Cole had already drafted a clause with my name in it. A clause about what would happen if I failed to produce an heir at all. I didn't sleep that night. I sat at the kitchen table with the folder open under the stove light, reading that clause over and over until the words stopped making sense and then, horribly, started making sense again. In the event the primary beneficiary's spouse does not produce a biological heir within a reasonable period, the trustee reserves right to redirect the residuary estate to secondary beneficiaries at his discretion. 6 weeks before my miscarriage, 6 weeks before I even knew I'd lose her, I heard Daniel's footsteps before I saw him. He stopped in the doorway in his t-shirt and sweatpants, rubbing his eyes. Ratch, it's 3 a.m. I turned the folder around and pushed it toward him. Did you know about this? He sat down slowly, and I watched his face while he read. Really watched it. The way you watch someone when you need to know if they're about to lie to you. His jaw tightened. Where did you get this? Your mother left it in my kitchen. Answer the question, Daniel. I didn't know it was already drafted. He rubbed his forehead. I knew they were talking about updating the trust. Mom mentioned it back in March. I told her to drop it. March. I felt my stomach turn over. I told your mother I was pregnant in March. Daniel went very still. You told her the same week, I said. And by the next month, there's a clause with a date on it, about what happens if I don't produce an heir. My voice cracked on the word produce like I was livestock. Daniel, this isn't a coincidence. I didn't approve this. His voice was low, careful. I swear to you, I didn't approve this. But you knew they were doing asterisk something dot asterisk. He didn't answer right away, and that silence told me more than anything he could have said. I thought it was Dad, controlling. I didn't think he stopped himself. You didn't think I'd actually lose the baby. I finished for him. So it didn't matter yet. That's not fair. None of this is fair. I stood up, my chair scraping loud in the quiet kitchen. Your mother stood in this house 6 days after I miscarried and asked when we'd try again for a real heir. Well, she was already sitting on paperwork, planning for the version where I never do. Daniel reached for my hand. I let him take it, but I didn't feel it. Not really. I'll call my father tomorrow, he said. I'll find out exactly what this is. No. I pulled my hand back and looked at him. Really looked. The way I hadn't let myself in days. I'll find out. Call Whitfield and Cole first thing tomorrow, and get me a copy of the entire trust. Every page, every amendment. Rachel, I want to know exactly how long your family has been planning around whether my body works. The offices of Whitfield and Cole occupied the 9th floor of a granite building downtown. The kind with a doorman who called you by name if you were important enough. I wasn't important enough, but Daniel's father was, which meant when I called and asked for a full copy of the Whitfield family trust, the receptionist put me on hold for 11 minutes before telling me that request would need to go through Robert directly. So I drove to Robert's office instead. He looked up from his desk with the mild irritation of a man who wasn't used to being interrupted. Rachel, Daniel didn't mention you'd be stopping by. Daniel doesn't know. I sat down without being asked. I want the complete trust documents. Every amendment, every date, every signature. Robert folded his hands. That's a family matter, and it's being handled appropriately. Family, Robert. Or was that clause written before you decided that part was negotiable? Something flickered behind his eyes. Not quite guilt, more like recalculation. A man realizing the piece on the board had moved somewhere he hadn't planned for. Margaret shouldn't have left that folder where you'd see it. So it's true. He was quiet for a moment too long. It's a contingency. Every family trust has contingencies. Contingencies for what, exactly? For me not being able to carry a child. You drafted that a month after I told your wife I was pregnant, Robert. Do you understand how that sounds? It sounds, he said carefully, like prudent estate planning that predates any of this. Predates it by 6 weeks. I leaned forward. I want to know who suggested the clause. I want to know if it was you, or Margaret, or someone else entirely. And I want to know why Vanessa's name is already sitting in a secondary beneficiary line. Robert's expression finally cracked. Just slightly. The first honest thing I'd seen from him. That conversation didn't come from me. Then who? He hesitated, glancing toward his closed office door like he expected someone to be listening on the other side of it. Rachel, I think you should ask your husband. Who else was in the room when this was discussed? My chest went cold. Daniel wasn't in the room. He told me he wasn't. Robert didn't say anything. He just looked at me with something that, for the first time, resembled pity. Robert? My voice came out smaller than I wanted it to. Who else was in the room? He reached into his drawer, pulled out a single page, and slid it across the desk without another word. At the bottom, beneath Margaret's signature and his own, was a third name I hadn't expected to see at all. Daniel's signature, dated the same week he told me he knew nothing. I drove home with the page on the passenger seat, like it might bite me if I looked at it too long. Daniel's signature. His actual signature, not some scrawled family joke. Sitting under a clause about my body's failure, like it was a line item in a quarterly budget. He was in the kitchen when I walked in, stirring pasta like it was any other Thursday. Hey, how'd it go with? He saw my face and stopped. I set the page on the counter between us. You signed it. Daniel looked down. I watched the color leave his face in real time. Rachel, I can explain. You told me you didn't approve this. Word for word, Daniel, I didn't approve this. My voice was shaking now, and I hated that it was shaken. because I wanted to sound strong, and instead, I sounded exactly like what I was. Someone who'd just found out her husband had lied to her 6 days after she lost their baby. You were in the room. It wasn't like that. He turned off the burner, hands not quite steady. Dad called a meeting in February, before you were even pregnant. He said the trust needed updating regardless, that it was overdue. I signed as a witness. That's all it was supposed to be. A witness to what, exactly? I didn't read the whole thing that day. I swear to you. I signed where Dad told me to sign. It was routine paperwork, Rachel. It was. You signed a document with a clause about me failing to produce an heir . And you're telling me you didn't read it? I didn't know that language was in there until you showed me the folder last night. That's the truth. Then why did you lie? Why say you weren't in the room at all? He opened his mouth, closed it. The silence stretched long enough that I understood the answer before he gave it. Because I knew how it would look, he finally said, and I was scared of exactly this conversation. So instead of telling me the truth, you let me find out from your father. I picked the page back up, my hands finally steady now, steadier than they'd been in days. Something had shifted in me, the shock was burning off, and underneath it was something colder, clearer. 6 weeks before I lost our daughter, you sat in a room with your parents and let them write a clause about replacing me, and then you came home and held my hand in a hospital parking lot like none of that had happened. Rachel, it's not that simple. It's exactly that simple. I grabbed my keys off the counter. I need to not be in this house right now. Where are you going? I was already at the door. To find out what else you all have been planning behind my back. I ended up at my sister Kayla's apartment, sitting on her couch with a mug of tea, going cold in my hands while I told her everything. She didn't say much until I got to the part about Daniel's signature. Wait. She sat up straighter. Vanessa? Your sister-in-law Vanessa? What about her? Kayla hesitated in a way that made my stomach drop. Rachel, I wasn't going to say anything because I thought it was nothing. But 2 weeks ago, I ran into her at the Whole Foods on Farmington. She was weird. Like overly nice. She asked how you were doing. And then out of nowhere, she said, "Tell Rachel I hope everything works out for her." And she smiled when she said it. It didn't sit right with me, but I figured I was reading into it. 2 weeks ago, I did the math. That was before the miscarriage. Kayla, I hadn't told anyone I was struggling with the pregnancy yet. Not even Margaret knew there were complications. Vanessa knew something. I called Daniel's cousin Priya that night, the one person in that family who'd never had patience for Margaret's games. She picked up on the second ring. And when I explained what I'd found, she went quiet for a long moment. I probably shouldn't tell you this, Priya finally said, but you deserve to know. Vanessa's been having dinner with Robert and Margaret almost every week since Christmas. Just the three of them. My mom mentioned it like it was normal. But I always thought it was strange, because Vanessa and Margaret never got along before this year. Since Christmas. That was months before anyone even knew I was pregnant. There's more. Priya's voice dropped lower. My mom said Margaret's been telling people Vanessa's kids are the real future of this family. She said it at Easter. Actually, right in front of everyone. Nobody thought much of it at the time. Vanessa just laughed it off. I sat there with the phone against my ear, feeling pieces shift into a shape I didn't want to see. Margaret hadn't started planning around my miscarriage. She'd been cultivating Vanessa as the replacement heir apparent for months, long before there was ever anything to replace me, which meant that clause hadn't been written in case I failed to produce an heir. It had been written to guarantee I would. I thought about the ultrasound room, the doctor's careful, clinical voice, the questions no one had fully answered about why. At only 11 weeks, with no history of complications, things had gone the way they did. I called my OB's office first thing the next morning and asked for something I probably should have asked for a week earlier. I asked for my complete medical file, and every prenatal vitamin and supplement Margaret had been dropping off as a gift since the day I told her I was pregnant. The pharmacist at the compounding lab called me back 4 days later. and I could tell from her tone before she said a single word that this wasn't going to be a simple answer. Mrs. Whitfield, I ran the panel on the supplement bottle you dropped off, the one labeled prenatal complex. A pause. It's not what's on the label. There's no folic acid in this at all. What we found instead was a compound that, in early pregnancy, can significantly increase the risk of complications. I'd strongly recommend you speak with your physician, and, honestly, consider speaking with someone else too. I sat in my car in the pharmacy parking lot for a long time after I hung up, staring at nothing. Margaret had brought me a new bottle every week since I told her I was pregnant. Handed it to me herself, always with the same line asterisk. I picked these up specially. They're better than what your doctor gives you. I'd taken them every morning with orange juice, grateful, genuinely grateful, that my mother-in-law seemed to finally be showing me some kind of care. I called my OB immediately and brought in the second bottle. The one still half full in my bathroom cabinet. She ran it through the hospital lab herself. And by the end of the week, I had it in writing, on letterhead. In language too precise to argue with, a substance never approved for pregnancy, present in a supplement bottle relabeled to look exactly like a trusted prenatal brand. It didn't prove intent. Not on paper. Any lawyer could argue Margaret bought the wrong bottle by mistake. That she wasn't a chemist. That this was tragic, bad luck, and nothing more. But I didn't believe in coincidences anymore. Not after the will clause dated 6 weeks before my miscarriage. Not after Vanessa's strange comment at Whole Foods, 2 weeks before anyone should have known something was wrong. Not after months of quiet dinners building Vanessa up as the real future of this family. Starting the same week I told Margaret I was pregnant, someone had decided, long before I lost my daughter, exactly how this story was supposed to end. I drove straight to Daniel's office, the lab report on the passenger seat, where his father's signature page had been days earlier. I found him at his desk, and when I set the folder down in front of him and told him what was inside it, he read it twice, his hands gripping the edge of his desk like the floor had tilted under him. Rachel, his voice came out hoarse. Are you saying my mother? I'm saying, I said, that we're done asking your family to explain themselves quietly. We're going to the police. Today. Detective Marsh was younger than I expected, patient in a way that surprised me. Given how strange our story must have sounded, a will, a tampered supplement bottle. But she took the lab report seriously, and within a week, a warrant let investigators pull the security footage from the pharmacy, where Margaret had been buying the bottles. She hadn't bought them from a pharmacy at all. The footage showed her at a shipping store 2 towns over, the kind that sold blank labels and let you print your own. 3 separate visits, each one timed just before she dropped off a gift at my house. Daniel sat beside me at the police station while Marsh laid it out, and I watched something in him break in a way I'd never seen before. Not anger. Something quieter and worse. Grief for the mother he'd thought he had. But the part that undid all of us came 2 days later. When Marsh called with the last piece, Vanessa had been the one to order the compound online, under her own name, from her own account. Shipped to Margaret's house the same week I announced my pregnancy. When investigators questioned her, she cracked almost immediately, sobbing, insisting it was Margaret's idea, that Margaret had promised her children would inherit everything. If there was no other heir to complicate things, that she'd never actually believed anyone would go through with it. She thought it was just talk. Robert, it turned out, hadn't known the full extent of it. He'd known about the will clause. He hadn't known about the bottles. When Marsh showed him the shipping records, Daniel told me later, his father sat in stunned silence for nearly a full minute before he said, quietly, she wouldn't. And then, looking at the paper again, she would. Margaret was arrested on a Tuesday morning, in her own driveway, in front of the same house where she'd once stood in my kitchen asking when we'd try again for a real heir. Vanessa was charged separately, cooperating in exchange for a lesser count. I didn't watch the arrest happen. I heard about it from Daniel, standing in our kitchen. The same counter where his mother had once sat down. That leather folder, like she was closing a deal. I keep thinking, he said quietly, that I sat in a room and signed something that made this possible. That I handed her the exact shape of what she needed. I didn't disagree with him. I couldn't, not honestly. But I also watched him drive to every single meeting with the district attorney afterward. Watched him testify against his own mother without flinching. Watched him become, slowly, someone I recognized again. The trial was set for spring, and for the first time since that ultrasound room, I let myself believe there might actually be an ending to this. One I hadn't lost complete control over. The trial lasted 6 days. I sat in the front row every single one of them, and on the 4th day, I testified about the folder left in my kitchen. About the vitamins I'd swallowed every morning, believing they were an act of love. About the ultrasound room, and the silence that had told me everything before the doctor spoke a word. Margaret never looked at me once. Vanessa cried through most of her own testimony, saying over and over that she never truly believed it would happen. That Margaret had made it sound like insurance, not intent. The jury didn't find that distinction as comforting as she'd hoped. She was convicted of conspiracy and reckless endangerment, sentenced to 4 years, most of it suspended in exchange for her cooperation. Margaret received 9 years, no suspension. When the verdict was read, she finally turned and looked at me, not with remorse, but with something closer to disbelief. Like she still couldn't understand how the story had gotten away from her. I held her gaze until she looked away first. Robert didn't fight the divorce papers. Margaret's lawyer eventually filed on her behalf from prison. He sold the house, the one with my name, once penciled into a clause about failing to belong in it, and quietly restructured the family trust. Himself, this time with an attorney I chose, sitting across the table from Daniel and me, writing language that had nothing to do with heirs or contingencies or anyone's worth, being measured by what their body could produce. Daniel and I stayed together, though together looked different for a long time. Months of therapy, some of it separate, most of it side by side. There were nights I wasn't sure we'd make it. Nights I looked at him and saw only the man who'd signed his name under a sentence about replacing me. But I also watched him rebuild himself from the ground up, choosing honesty in the small moments long after the big dramatic ones had passed, which is really the only way anyone proves it wasn't just for show. 2 years later, I gave birth to a daughter, Emma, born healthy, loud, and furious at the world in the specific way newborns are. Daniel cried harder than I did. In the hospital room, he held her against his chest and said, quietly, "Nobody is ever going to write a clause about you." I believe him. I think about Margaret sometimes, in that kitchen, folder in hand, asking when we'd try again for a real heir. As if the daughter I'd already lost hadn't been real enough to count. She was wrong about a lot of things, but she was wrong most of all about this. She thought family was something you could rewrite on paper. It turned out to be the one thing she couldn't control at all.